Good evening and welcome to the City of Warrenville Community Development and Planning Committee of the Whole regular meeting on Monday, June 24th, 2017. Clerk, may I please have the roll call?
Alderman Ashour,
Here.
Alderman Berry,
Here.
Alderman Bevere,
Here.
Alderman Davalos is excused this evening, Alderman Goodman,
Here.
Alderman Hoffman,
Here.
Alderman Widener,
Here.
Alderman Wilson.
Here.
Thank you. Now, will everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Now's the time we set aside for citizens' comments. I have two this evening. Please come to the podium, adjust the microphone, state your name and address, and provide us with your comments. Pat O'Connor.
All right, I'm Pat O'Connor. I'm at 3-570 Warrenville, Illinois. I'm down the way from you people. I had two questions. The first question is, I went to the Thursday meeting and I have a big question. The people who want to move into the big home over here, and we had a concert in the park every Wednesday. I want to know how you people will work that out. You two people, like when your time for everybody is in the house, it was have a big meaning and say we do to have the concert in the park, and we get a lot of people come to it. Last Wednesday, a lot of people attend. I can't go, I had to work, but I went by it. It's a lot of people who went to it. It's huge. And my second question is about my mom lives in West Chicago. The people will never cut the grass in the parkway. The house is here is like the thing. It will never cut the grass. My mom can't cut the grass every time, and we want to know if it happened here in Warrenville, what people expect us to do. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Dorothy Deer.
I'm Dorothy Deer. I am chair of Warrenville and Bloom. I live at 30W077 Penny Lane. This year, the hanging baskets and bridge planters are really quite awesome and gorgeous, and we are thrilled that they are staying so beautiful into the middle of the summer. It's been a hot summer, and even though we've had periodic rain, many rains have been light, and the flowers and the leaves cover the top of the baskets, and the rain doesn't always get down to the baskets. If it's a hard rain, then it does work, and then we can skip watering. Our watering vendor has found it necessary when it's been so hot to do daily watering, and we've supported him in the schedule. We simply didn't want the flowers to deteriorate like they have last year and even the year before. But what this means, because there's been so many hot days, we're running out of money from the hotel motel tax grant, and we want to bring this to your attention. The pole planters on the Warrenville Road Bridge are new H2O water saver planters with reservoirs on the bottom and only require watering every other day. but there are 2 baskets on each pole, so that means double watering time. Looking ahead for next year, Warrenville and Bloom has applied for a secondary grant to purchase enough hanging baskets in the same reservoir style to replace all of our small green hanging baskets. This is out of our current grant, and we would buy these in February, March, and the greenhouse would start growing them before the end of this fiscal year. When we discovered we were going to have a shortfall, we inquired if we could move that secondary grant into our primary grant and found out it's definitely against the rules, so that won't happen. It may be a good thing, as now we know we'll have better hanging baskets for next year. But how are we going to keep our beautiful flowers gorgeous through this season? We had a special meeting, and Warrenville and Bloom has decided to take some money out of our reserves and extend the watering budget, the money that was available, into August, and we know we can water at least until August 22. That's a pretty approximate date because it does depend how much rain we get and how much more daily watering we have to do. But what we would like to do is keep them into September, into Labor Day, and best of all, it would be wonderful if we could, if they're as gorgeous as they are and hold their color and all, if we could keep them up through Art on the Prairie. That might be a little stretch, but past Labor Day would be a good goal. We share this information now so that you have this and can mull it over in your minds. We are actually going to officially make a request at one of the future meetings. But we'd like you to mull it around in your mind and see if you can see some way that the city could find a few dollars. We won't be asking for a lot to help us extend our season. Thank you.
Thank you. Now's the time for officials and staff members' comments. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of new restaurants opening in town. Skippy's Euros next to Spring Hill Suites. Kind of an out-of-way place, but we stopped there the other night. Very nicely remodeled. Nice little restaurant, good food. Worth a little going around the block to get there. So if you get an opportunity, stop in at Skippy's. Nice addition to our list of fine restaurants in Warrenville. Speaking of which, Chuy's is opening tomorrow in Cantera. I was there tonight, had to leave my meal early to come here. Couldn't even have a margarita. That's the kind of sacrifices I make for this town. Great food, beautiful venue. The place was packed tonight. Very excited about the grand opening of Chuy's. They're very well known and they'll bring a lot of good people to Warrenville. So if you have the opportunity to stop either one of those places or any of our existing restaurants, please do. Tax money comes to the city through those things, and of course it brings people from outside of town to enjoy themselves and to spend their money here, which is a good thing for us. So, excuse me, a couple new restaurants to visit when you have the opportunity. Oh, and National Night Out next Tuesday night at Cerny Park. Please come out and attend. This is another signature event for the city. We've gotten 2 national awards for the quality of our presentation and our gathering. Excuse me. 5 to 9 p.m. at Cerny Park. Great family event. Lots of free stuff, which always brings people out. So please join us. And then next weekend, the 4th and the 5th, we have Summer Days. If you have questions about how that's going to unfold, go to the Park District website and get your answers there. But another fun event. We have 3 or 4 big events. That's one of them through the year. So hope to see you there.
Thank you. Alderman? Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, I also wanted to announce the last couple neighborhood roll calls are coming up. On the 25th, which is tomorrow at 6:30, the Preserve at Cantera Clubhouse is going to have a neighborhood roll call. And on the 29th at 6:30, Timber Drive and Grove Lane, next to the City Well House building, will have our last neighborhood roll call of the season. I attended the one at Maple Hill earlier in the summer, and I think so far they have been much better attended this year from what I understand. It's great to see people getting out and learning about what the police are doing and meeting the police officers who are patrolling their neighborhoods. And it's a real great program, so please come on out if it's going to be in your neighborhood and support our local police officers.
Thank you. Other comments from the Alderman? City Administrator?
I don't have anything to add tonight, thank you.
Okay, let's begin the business of the meeting. Alderman, I'd like to call your attention to two additions that were on the dais this evening. There's the redlined version of the massage ordinance that's on our agenda this evening, and then there's a bi-monthly code enforcement activity report that should be included with this evening's agenda. First item is consideration of the intergovernmental agreement with DuPage County for the DuPage Justice System, and Police Department Chief Ray Toronto will introduce this topic. Chief?
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. Before you, in your consideration tonight, is a request for an approval of an intergovernmental agreement with the County of DuPage and the City of Warrenville. And this concerns the DuPage Justice Information, or DUJIS system, project we've been working on now for a little over a year. This will involve all of the DUCOM communities and a few communities that are not participants of DUCOM, but are also signing on for this. What the DUJIS system will do is replace the current computer-aided dispatch system, which DUCOM utilizes, and also the records management system, which we rely on at the police department when the officers take reports digitally, and also the way that they are transmitted to the state's attorney's office and what have you, and the way that they are stored. By having this common link with all of these communities, it makes it much more efficient that we can access in a read-only copy copies of the reports from the other communities that are in DUJIS. And along with DUJIS, excuse me, it's not just the police departments, it'll also be the state's attorney's office, the clerk's office, I believe the probation department, and several other county governmental organizations. For a project this large, there's a cost-sharing component to this, and our total cost, which was discussed and approved in the current FY18 budget preparation, Warrenville's cost for the entire project is $244,079, of which the council approved in the current budget year a payment of, I believe, right around $24,000 to go into this. This should be operational hopefully within the next year, that this will be up and running. Now, for a project this size, obviously it was going to be administered by the county. And what this agreement does is it spells out the responsibilities of the participants, which would be the municipalities, Warrenville included, the County of DuPage, and the ETSB, which is the Emergency Telephone Safety Board. The county is basically responsible for the day-to-day oversight, maintenance, and administration of the system. The ETSB procured funds through the tax that they have levied as part of the ETSB taxing rate that goes for the funding of these projects. And again, this was something that we had already talked about and discussed. This was reviewed, and a copy of it's included in the backup, and it was reviewed by the city attorney and found to be appropriate. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if you do have them.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Thank you. I have a lot of questions. The agreement looks really interesting and has a lot of different components to it. Page 4 talks about a joint purchasing agreement, which is hereby created. Do we expect to use this often? Because it doesn't really have any limit on the type of supplies or services that might be covered by that, and I don't know what sort of joint purchasing we might need to do through the county.
Well, for something like this, they have certain parameters that are spelled out, and that would be for the type of like in-car cameras, if eventually we went to body cameras, and also for the mobile data terminals or the computers that are inside the squad cars. They have to meet within certain parameters. ETSB has spec'd those, and we would be able, when the time comes and we were going to do a purchase, of being to do a cooperative purchase with other agencies, hopefully reducing our cost, much like we do with the state purchases for vehicles that we do now.
Right, that's what I was thinking. I know we do sort of state purchases, but I don't know about the county stuff. Okay, then on page 6, it talks about the operation and training. So what new training is going to be required, and is there going to be a lot of staff time to implement this new system? Or is everyone already going to be able to use it based on the way they use the current police report system?
Yeah, I think there's many different components for this. Obviously, the CAD is going to, the computer-aided dispatch is going to involve DUCOM and not our personnel. Our biggest training component, which I believe is fairly minor, is going to be for the records management system. Obviously, whenever you change some type of a computer program, there's certain little nuances. This training would be done in-house, which would not require an expenditure of having to have an outside consultant come in and do the training, or our people leave the building, and it would be done on duty time. The very nice component of this RMS is we'll be able to get much more detailed management reports. It'll give us a lot more information on call volume and what have you.
Yeah, and having it standardized, I completely see the benefits, especially to the state's attorney and how they can use the information coming from you and coming from anybody else much more consistently. I see what you're saying. So you talked about the hardware that's going to be necessary. That's on the next page, page 7. It says that the participant will, at its own expense, procure and maintain such hardware as may be necessary. Do we see this causing any new large expenses in the near future?
No, we have in the CMRP, we have a built-in replacement schedule for our data processing thing like our MDTs and also our cameras. I believe we get a minimum of 6 to 7 years on our MDTs, and also the same with the cameras. Obviously now, we try to replace them in cycles. The biggest thing right now with the cameras is the pixelation. Every year they come out, the cameras get a little smaller, the pixelation gets better, and what have you. So, you know, it's a continuous cycle of replacement, but it's nothing where we're going to have to go out and make a huge purchase all at once.
Okay, so until we have our regular maintenance, everything we have now is going to continue to work with what they're doing.
That's correct. It's all compatible right now.
Okay, that's wonderful. Page 8 talks about us determining annually the total number of users who are going to access the system. Is this the sort of thing where just our records management personnel will be accessing the system, or is the number of users considered everybody in the department?
Well, it would be anybody that would be able to write a police report or what have you. Obviously, the records people would be more, they would do more detailed accessing and entry of data and what have you into the system, but it would be basically everybody we have. So it's not just the sworn officers, but it's also the civilian personnel that we have. And the reason that we do an annual update on personnel is that could change.
Yeah.
We don't know as our authorized strength may change or what have you. It could increase or decrease, and our cost share allocation would be adjusted.
Okay. Next is perhaps a technical question. I'm not sure if you'll know the answer, but on page 9, it talks about reimbursement to the county and reimbursement to the ETSB. Under section E, number 1 and number 2 seem to double the payment. It says, we're reimbursing the county and the ETSB for costs expended in the implementation of the system. And then 2, it's reimbursing the ETSB for costs in their normal operations not to exceed the total costs in the implementation. So it sounds like it's the implementation costs, but double that. And I couldn't figure out why we would pay that twice.
My understanding is everything that we got in the estimations, the figures that we got were basically hard figures, and the only thing that would change with that would be if another community happened to drop out at some point. And because of that, the burden would have to be shared. But my understanding is there's no double charging of a fee to the city.
Okay, maybe it's just phrased awkwardly then. And my last question is sort of a more overall question, which is how much did it cost for the system that we're replacing? I mean, that was years ago. Was it a one-time purchase, or has it been sort of annual fees? How does this compare? Is it a lot more expensive?
You know, that I can't really honestly answer because that was in place when I got here. It's over 10 years old. It's fairly limited and basic in what can be done with it right now, and it's also on a much smaller scale. So I think that the cost for this comparatively goes up with the magnitude, with the number of clients that you're going to be serving with this particular system. But I couldn't give you anything on what we paid initially for the one we're using now.
Okay, is there a way that we could ask the finance to come up with a little bit of information about that? I just sort of want to compare. It is an old number, of course. It would be, past expenses. I'm just curious because, $200,000 is just a lot for something we haven't bought in a long time, and I'm trying to get a sense of how a lot that is.
And part of this too, if you remember when we discussed this, and maybe to refresh everybody's memory, part of this was we were reimbursing portions of the salaries of 2 additional employees that were IT specialists that had to be added by the county.
Yeah,
so
that's
it
in the
was
contract.
it was salary costs and benefits, and then also the hardware costs. But I could certainly check with the finance director tomorrow and see if there's any information that he'd be able to ascertain for that.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? If there's no other questions, I'd request a motion. Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council approve the intergovernmental agreement between the County of DuPage and the City of Warrenville for participation in the DuPage Justice Information System.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. Our next item on the agenda is consideration of massage establishment and business license requirement revisions, and the City Administrator, John Coakley, will present this agenda item. John?
Thank you. I think in life, whenever you do something new, you start to find there's maybe some things in the process. You've had existing systems and ways you've been doing things that you start to look at again and you question them. This is what happened with this new massage establishment business licensing. As you recall, about 4 or so months ago, council adopted the new ordinance so that we're licensing the establishments where they have massage therapists working and do all those kind of services. And there was identified, I believe, 7 or 8 or 9 in town. We've been going through the process to actually have them fill out the application, doing extensive background checks to make sure the businesses were qualified under our ordinance to meet the license requirements. And as I recall, off the top of my head, I didn't have the number in front of me. I think 4 have been approved. There are 5 now that are pending. As we're going through this process, several more applications have been going through the system, and I think there's a couple others that are still in some level of background. Long and short of this, we discovered there's some things that just were a little bit ambiguous or not as clear as they could be in both some sections of the business licensing under the city code and some sections primarily of the massage establishment license. Thank you, Alderman Goodman, for asking for the red line copy. It does make it easier. We'd gone through so many back and forths with the attorney and staff and reviews. Alma actually sorted it all out this morning and put this together. I had gotten a little lost in the changes. Anyway, long and short, it primarily just clearly identifies that the mayor is the ultimate deciding authority over any licenses. We've been under that same process for probably 30 years. It was not clearly delineated in the code, it was just implied. So we wanted to make sure that was clear, specifically in the massage licensing section. In liquor licenses, those are very clear. It's under the state statutes that he is the liquor commissioner, so therefore he is the final approving authority. Business licenses, it was fairly clear. It wasn't so clear in this new section. There's a couple of other things. Some of it had to do with the changes that we're making. The attorney found it was important to add this small section where the city administrator will temporarily decide if they meet the qualifications or not for a short time until whatever is pending prior to this adoption of this amendment. So there's about a 4-week period here. Well, I will take all the information from the investigations done by community development, finance, and the police department determine whether they meet the qualifications or not. Turn it over to the mayor, who then will make the decision to sign the license or not. It does not change the outcome. The mayor and the clerk still sign and attest to all licenses, but in the interim, we wanted to take it out from, the attorney felt it was important to take it out from the mayor because he was part of the process as we were going through this. So that's my best attempt at trying to make this simple. It really is a very simple number of changes, but it got to be complicated trying to restructure some sections of this code. So you see all these underlined areas with the additions and crossed out areas. But the basic changes here are to make it very clear the mayor is the ultimate deciding authority. Our staff and those 3 departments I mentioned are the ones that are doing the background investigation, and I have a role of administering it just as I would with any other ordinance in a macro sense. So with that, if there's questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I also have 2 of the 3 departments that do the investigations here to help if there's something more technical.
Thank you. Questions from the alderman? Alderman Goodman.
I'm sorry if you just said this, but why do you need to approve the pending applications and not the mayor?
The current process with the massage licenses had the mayor reviewing them as if he was doing part of the investigation. The attorney felt it was important, therefore, anything that was in the queue or in process up until this change in the code is made, that they have a different official making a decision whether all the investigations showed that they were qualified or showed they were not qualified. I would not be signing anything. Ultimately, the mayor is still the signing authority. Ultimately, he is the person making the final decision. Mine is more of a administrative role, just to make sure that all the boxes are checked and that the backgrounds don't flag anything that would disqualify, make sure that they are qualified. And it is only for the period up until this new amendment is adopted. There's been some going through the process, and we want to make sure those are handled carefully.
I see, so it's because there are people who are applying under the current rules,
Yes.
and the current rules sort of mistakenly gave too much power to do investigation to the mayor instead.
That's how it had appeared, so we want to just make sure we're doing everything very carefully. And the attorney recommended we do everything very carefully, and we want to follow his advice so we don't get ourselves trip over our own process here. So you put it very well, much better than I did. Thank you. Yes, it's just a very temporary thing. And after this amendment, assuming it's adopted by the council, I won't have any role except to make sure people are reviewing them and passing it on.
Okay, that sounds fine. My only other question was on page 13. I think there's a mistake in the language. It says a licensee has failed to correct city-identified building, health, or fire codes. And I assume that actually means violations of the building, health, or fire codes. So if we could make that correction before it comes in front of the city council. So it's not just correcting the fire codes, it's correcting violations of the fire codes, one assumes.
You said page 13, what's this section?
Section 9.
Okay. You're on the red line? Okay.
Mhm.
I'm on that down one, that's why. We'll make sure we get that corrected. What you're saying sounds accurate. It must just be a word missing. Thank you.
Did you have
Thank you.
suggested wording, Alderman Goodman, to insert in this item?
Insert violations of.
Okay. Does the clerk have that down? Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts or questions from Alderman Goodman? Finished? Other aldermen? Any comments, questions? If not, I'd request a motion on this item. Alderman Goodman.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council pass an ordinance amending massage establishment business licensing and certain business licensing regulations.
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, City Administrator Coakley. Appreciate it. Item 3 on the agenda is an informational update on City of Warrenville sanitary sewer capacity issues. And Deputy Public Works Director Phil Kukler will present this item. Phil?
Thank you and good evening. Warrenville sanitary sewage flows are transported to Naperville, who then transports them further to South Naperville to their Springbrook treatment plant and treats them there. There are several intergovernmental agreements that have been approved by both cities to define how much sewage flows Warrenville can send to Naperville, and then how Naperville charges Warrenville for those flows. Both Warrenville and Naperville are required to sign off on all IEPA permits for sanitary sewer extensions in the city of Warrenville, and that could be some of our projects where we extend sewer into neighborhoods that aren't served currently, or some of the newer development and subdivision projects that are coming down the pike here. Recently, Naperville's been signing off on these IEPA permits in the past without question, because they've been monitoring the flows that have come out of Warrenville, and there really haven't been any really large developments that have been proposed in Warrenville in recent years without any question. So Naperville signs off on them, and everything's gone smoothly. That was until very recently when we submitted an IEPA permit application for sanitary sewer that would serve a large portion of the Southwest District. Naperville has identified they're not comfortable signing off on these permits because they've identified several occasions in recent years where Warrenville's exceeded the agreed upon flows that we can send down there, and it's generally been in wet weather conditions where there's been a large rainstorm, and they've been the peak conditions. The average daily conditions we send down there are still far below what capacity we're allowed, but it's these peak flows that happen when it rains really heavy that are raising concerns with Naperville. The main reason for those flows is, I mentioned wet weather. It's infiltration and inflow into our sanitary sewer system. So it might be infiltration into pipes, inflow into some of the sanitary manholes. Warrenville, going back to about 2000, has done some improvements for I&I, which it's also known as, but they've been kind of minor improvements. We've did some work back around 2000. We identify if we find leaks now in manholes, we're going and grouting those manholes and things like that, but it's not a large scale I&I reduction program in the city. And it's Naperville and Warrenville both meter the flows that are going to Naperville. So when we get the bills from Naperville, we can verify that the flows are consistent with what they're metering. And when there's a large rainstorm, it's evident that there's I&I coming into the system, sometimes as much as like 2 to 3 times as much as the average day's flows that we experience. In order to address Naperville's concerns and ensure that Warrenville can provide efficient sanitary service to the full build-out of the community in the future, staff's recommending a couple of steps. The first step is to complete a detailed analysis of the projected sanitary sewer flows in Warrenville at full build-out. Item F4 on tonight's agenda includes an agreement with Engineering Enterprises to continue assisting the city with this analysis. This will involve a comparison of the population under the 1984 Comprehensive Land Use Plan that was projected, and the flows or sanitary sewer flows projected from that plan, and comparing that to the current Comprehensive Land Use Plan, which has the Southwest District, the Old Town and Civic Center subareas as well that have changed since that 1984 plan. If the flows are higher under the current land use plan, the two cities are going to need to work together to determine a path forward to allow those developments to happen, which would probably involve some significant sanitary sewer improvements, infrastructure improvements that Warrenville need to construct as part of that to help attenuate the flows that are going down, the peak flows that are going down to Naperville for treatment. The second step would be an I&I reduction program, and this is also an agreement with proposed agreement with Engineering Enterprises under item F4 tonight that Christine's going to be presenting in a couple of minutes. The likely result of this will be a 10 to 15 year program that could end up being about $300,000 to $400,000 a year in probably sewer lining, manhole lining, and those type of improvements to help reduce the amount of inflow and infiltration into the system. Addressing these I&I issues will continue beyond the 10 to 15 years too, because the system's going to continue to age. Some of the improvements that happen will age as well, and they'll fail. Naperville has an aggressive I&I program in town, and they're spending a lot of money each year to address those issues, whether it be some pumps that are connected to the sanitary sewer illegally, or some infiltration into their sewer main lines, infiltration into the private sanitary sewer services. There's a lot of improvements that they devote money to each year. Our system's much smaller, so we won't be spending as much money as them, but it will require a big investment of money over the coming, probably 10 to 15 years, but it will continue on beyond that. It's not going to go away. It's not something that after 10 to 15 years we're done with it. It's going to be something that we're going to continue to have to spend money on. One practical benefit to addressing I&I would be we're going to pay Naperville less to treat water because we'll be sending less water sewage down their way. I mean, I looked at March 30th and 31st, which was a fairly large storm this year. Just in the obvious increase in flows from infiltration and inflow, we paid them an extra $4,000 just for those 2 days to treat those flows. So don't have details on how much it costs overall every year for that, but that's an example of just 2 days of flow where it increased because of a storm. We paid them a significant amount of money for that increase over what our average flows are. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Alderman Goodman?
I have one sort of general question. What kind of effect will this have on the EMRP? I mean, one of the things that we talked about when we set up the EMRP was, the aging of the system and when it needed to be replaced. But if we're getting to the point where we're going to have to line all these things, perhaps not very long before they're scheduled to be replaced, would we spend a lot of time trying to worry about which parts of the system it doesn't make any cost-effective sense to line until after they're replaced, and then replace it with something that's already lined, and those sorts of things going forward? Because I know that these systems have very long lifetimes in many cases, but some of them are already starting to get pretty old, as we discussed when we were putting together the EMRP.
I don't know yet how that would affect the MRP. I'd have to work with Kevin, finance director, on that to determine the impacts there. I know it's likely if we're spending $300,000 to $400,000 a year on an I&I reduction program, that it's going to probably impact sewer rates at some point. We're going to have to figure out how that impacts, but we will know better what those costs would be after EEI completes this initial development of the I&I reduction program, because my basic understanding is they'll divide the city up into basins or areas, and it might be 10 to 15 areas, and then focus on one of those areas individually, and taking some flow metering in those areas, like year 1, year 2, and the first area might be then development of what the improvements would have to be in that area, and then year 3 would be the physical improvements. But that would be then in year 2 you'd also include flow metering of area 2, and that eventually builds up to evaluating the 10 to 15 areas of the city and what improvements are needed. And once that report's done, they'll have a cost estimate on what we'll need to spend each year on those items.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I'm not asking for a cost estimate right now, obviously. We need to flesh out all the parameters of this first. But since it is an enterprise fund, and since they pretty much do have to use user fees in order to support the costs, does this mean that we're looking at some pretty significant sewer rate increases probably to deal with this? Because, I mean, if we've gotten to the point where we may already have gotten past capacity without knowing it, then it sounds like this has some pretty immediate, capital costs up front in the near future in order to deal with that.
Yeah, and I don't know what those. It's something I have to do with Kevin to see how the fee is structured right now, and then how the additional costs will be factored into that in the future. We do have a couple of years. I mean, the first year of the I&I reduction program would probably be fiscal year 2019, so next year, and that would involve estimated fairly modest, like $75,000 investment in flow metering to start with, and then that builds. Year 2 gets a little more expensive, and year 3 through like 12 or 15 would be the full like $300,000 to $400,000. So we'll have a little bit of time to evaluate that and report on what the fee increases would have to be.
Right, because I mean, even saving $4,000 from time to time for water treatment for Naperville isn't going to offset $300,000 in a year.
It definitely won't.
Excuse me, the city
Thank you.
administrator would like to make a couple points. John?
Yeah, I wanted to just interject on some of those things. One, I want to make sure everybody understands, because most of you don't deal with sewer treatment and billing every day. The inflow from stormwater, of course, doesn't go through anyone's home, so it doesn't go through the water meter, so we cannot bill for that. So we're paying, and we never collect the money. So if we're paying $4,000, we're never going to collect $4,000. Now that's a minor amount of money in totality of the whole enterprise fund, but there are much larger rain events. There's you take that over a number of times a year, on, and we're also at a point where we're exceeding the IEPA permit that our portion of their system is allowed to have. So we've got to deal with this. It's a good idea to do anyway throughout time. We did it 20 years ago, and we had a grant for it at that time, and apparently we just haven't really kept up with it since then. But it's a good maintenance item. We need to start that process, as Phil is talking about. It'd be an ongoing thing, so it won't be that huge expense all the time, but it would be an investment. I believe, from a layman's perspective, and before we have any numbers and any engineering done, there's going to have to also, there will be expenses to do these things, line, sewer pipe and other things. There's probably going to be some extension of the life of some of those pipes by doing that. It might be 5 years, not another 70, but that will also help reduce the future replacement costs, because it'll push it out further. So That's why we're going to hire some engineers and then get some finance people involved in it. And there'll be a lot of calculations. You'll see all of this before it gets approved. This is more of a, I guess I'd say, coming attractions, if you will. There's a big program, and we don't want to just spring it on you when it's all ready to be presented. But I think there'll be pluses and minuses in that. It certainly comes out of the sewer rates, so we have to look at how to adjust those. But I think spread over time, it's not going to be a huge spike at any one year.
Thank you. Alderman Bevere?
Do we still have a program, about the sump pump thing? We had one going a few years back, the Brick Kickers or something was called, and where they did a voluntary, you could go in their house and try to get their sump pumps hooked up to the storm drains instead of in the sanitary sewer. I don't know if something like that would help again to start a program up like that. That was one of my questions. And the other one was, we got a couple projects talking about coming into town. Is we going to be able to go through with them projects, or are they going to be on hold because of, the rate we're pushing over there?
The first question with the sump pump connections, we do, I don't know, there's a formal program that right now is being run, but we do help people when they do want to connect sump pumps to the storm sewer if their storm sewer available. Typically what we do with the residents is Public Works will take care of the portion of that connection between the right-of-way line, so the back of the sidewalk generally, if there's a sidewalk in the neighborhood, and then the storm sewer. So we take care of the part in the city right-of-way, and the resident would take care of the part from their home to the right-of-way line. As far as the developments are concerned, that's what's caused us to be a little more urgent for us in working with Naperville. We've been, over the last 6 weeks, roughly, talking with their staff and trying to define exactly what they're looking for, what information they're looking for from us, so they are comfortable signing off on these IEPA permits. I'm confident that the couple of immediate developments that are proposed, there's capacity in the line to accept those. But I think Naperville is looking for a commitment from us to start planning for reducing the I&I that's going into the system. That's not going to happen overnight, as I mentioned. It's going to take a couple of years before we even get to making any physical improvements. But if we start on this I&I reduction program, that I think shows a little bit of good faith on our part to attacking the problem that's causing the peak flows to go up so high. It's not, again, as I mentioned, it's not the average daily flows. There's plenty of capacity in line for what we experience on a daily basis. It's those rainstorms that are causing the issue for us right now. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, just, as long as you got programs going that people can hook up, and any new building should include going right to the storm sewer, I would think. I don't know if you can promote that, but, just helps later in the future that stuff ain't happening. So I was just asking a few questions about it. So.
Oh, sure. And in our city code, we require the new residential developments hooked up to a storm sewer that's available. So in the newer, like the Lexington Trace, but the Bremy Drive, the MI Homes development, their storm sewers were all extended around those properties with stubs for all those units to connect directly to the storm sewer. So there's no danger of them connecting to the sanitary sewer.
Thank you.
Alderman Hoffman?
I was just wondering, with you're going to put a lining inside the pipe. That's what they do, is reline the pipe.
That's in a lot of cases, that's correct. Yes.
What kind of effect is that going to have on the overall functional capacity of the system?
Generally, it makes the inside of the pipe smoother, so it's one smooth surface without things built up in the line or the joints that are in the pipes, and that it doesn't generally have a large effect on the capacity of the system.
So
it's not a thick liner.
It doesn't close the inside diameter of the pipe any?
It closes a little bit. Depending on the size of the pipe, the thickness of the liner varies a little bit.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to the next agenda item. This was for information only. Number 4 is consideration of the professional service agreements with Engineering Enterprises Incorporated. Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will present this topic. Christine?
Thank you. As Phil previously presented, the staff is recommending the city execute 2 separate agreements with Engineering Enterprises, Inc. They previously developed the Southwest District Capacity Report and are currently performing a citywide water model for the city of Warrenville. The first agreement is for wastewater system capacity analysis. As Phil mentioned, this is to review the agreements with the multiple agreements with Naperville, analyze the existing and future sanitary flows, analyze all of the meters in the sanitary sewer manholes, assist in estimating future population equivalents. And all of these scopes of services are to address the concerns that were raised by Naperville. The other agreement is for the infiltration and inflow reduction program. Again, as Phil previously mentioned, it's to develop a program for the entire city. The consultant would break down the city into multiple basins, prioritize these basins, and develop a 10 to 15-year program with cost estimates for the program. Currently, there is no funding in the FY18 budget, so this would require a budget amendment. Phil and I reviewed the cost estimates for these proposals, and they seemed reasonable. And I will take any questions.
Questions from the alderman? Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council, 1, pass a resolution approving professional service agreements with Engineering Enterprises Incorporated for wastewater treatment and collection system capacity analysis in an amount of $40,459, and an infiltration and inflow reduction program development in an amount of $58,423. 2, authorize senior civil engineer Hocking to execute the agreements. And 3, direct staff to prepare the necessary budget amendment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Item number 5 is consideration of professional service agreement with James J. Bennis and Associates, and Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will again introduce this topic.
Thank you.
Christine?
The Community Development FY18 work program anticipated that multiple significant private development projects would be submitted this fiscal year for review and approval. The department is actively processing 3 subdivision PUD applications, reviewing 4 concept developments, and 1 redevelopment application. Now, I know I am Superwoman, but all of these extra developments are a little bit above my capacity. Both firms, James J. Bennis and then the following agenda item, were identified as having the appropriate qualifications to perform these reviews, which include engineering, stormwater, floodplain, wetland, traffic engineering, best management practices, and erosion and sediment control review. They're also familiar, both firms are also familiar with the city's infrastructure and previously have provided review services for the city. The contracts are based on hourly rates. However, in the FY18 budget, we did budget for $44,000 for these outside engineering consultants. I estimate for a, typical review of one of these developments from beginning to end, for example, like a preliminary PUD, typical costs are probably in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. So this allows under the budget for us to review approximately 10, I would consider mid-level, mid-size developments. I would be happy to answer any questions at this time. Again, this is for this agenda item and the following agenda item as well.
Are there questions from the council members? Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, I mean, you said approximately 10. Is that sort of a cap? Are we looking at the possibility of needing more than that? Do we really think we'll be pretty well under it and this should be plenty?
It's hard to tell at this point. I mean, we're halfway through.
I know I'm asking you to predict the future, so go.
Our favorite part of the budget process is predicting how much development we're going to have in any given year, given the economy and the real estate market. I can say that there's a lot of interest in development in the city of Warrenville at this point in time. I think that's a positive indication of the economy and the local real estate market and where Warrenville sits in both of those, so that's a good thing. We're hoping that the budget that we have established this year would be sufficient to cover the costs that we're going to incur this calendar or this fiscal year. Most importantly, I did want to point out, though, that the developments that do submit formal applications to the city are required to pay site plan review and engineering review and inspection fees. And in almost all cases, the amount of fees that they pay will more than cover the outside consulting costs. So if ultimately we end up spending more than the $44,000, that's because we've had a lot more development applications and we've taken in a lot more application and review fees. So in the end, there still should be a net positive in terms of revenue for the city, even after paying the outside engineering consultants.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Are there other questions, comments? Alderman Goodman.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council, 1, pass a resolution approving a professional services agreement with James J. Bennis and Associates for development engineering review services based upon agreed hourly rates, and 2, authorize senior civil engineer Hawking to execute the agreement.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6 is consideration of professional service agreement with Engineering Resource Associates Incorporated. And once again, Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will present this topic.
This is similar to the professional service agreement with James J. Bennis and Associates to provide engineering consulting review services for future ongoing and future development projects. And again, these services funding were included in the FY 2018 budget. We decided to go with 2 different engineering companies in case there was a conflict of interest. Both of these firms do provide development engineering services for developers, so we felt it was necessary to obtain contracts for both firms.
Questions from the council members? If not, Alderman Goodman.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council, 1, pass a resolution approving a professional services agreement with Engineering Resource Associates Incorporated for development engineering review services based upon agreed hourly rates, and 2, authorize senior civil engineer Hocking to execute the agreement.
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Hocking.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Item number 7 is to review and file quarterly economic development activity report. If there's any comments or questions any of the council members have, hearing one, Mayor Brummel, go ahead.
I just want to note that that's 4 pages of economic development activity. For those who are insisting that nothing ever happens in Warrenville, I invite you to read this report because a lot of really good things are right on the cusp of happening at this point. A lot of things that have taken, and sometimes many years to prepare for. We have prepared, things are starting to happen, and I think you're going to see some very nice developments in the near future in Warrenville. Again, 4 pages of economic development discussion and potential for the community.
Thank you. So we will review and file those reports. Item number 8 is to review and file Community Development Department decision packages status report. Does anybody have any comments or questions regarding those matters? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 9, which is to review and file the bi-monthly code enforcement activity report. And if there's no questions or comments regarding that report, we'll move on to miscellaneous agenda, which we don't have any miscellaneous information to share with anyone. There's no closed session this evening. And with that, there's one more motion that's needed.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I don't anticipate any further discussion regarding that. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, and good evening, everyone.